Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Family Talk. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are going to be talking about DD Awareness Month. The month of March has been designated as DD Awareness Month, and so today I have Gary Tonks, who is the CEO of the ARC of Ohio, joining us to tell us a little bit about the history of the DD system in Ohio, why awareness is so important, and what families' role should be in today's DD system. So Gary, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. I thought we might start with a little bit about you. Where do you come from? What's your background? What brought you to this field?
Well, I grew up with a cousin with cerebral palsy. Didn't really think much about it. In our family, that was normal. So I thought for years I was going to be a fifth grade elementary school teacher. Went to college and started dating a girl the first week in my freshman year that was a special ed major. She invited me to a dance for people with disabilities, sponsored by a group called Youth ARC. Broke up with that girl, stayed with the organization as a volunteer throughout college. When I graduated, still thinking I wanted to be a school teacher. During the summer, I got a job in an ARC group home. Worked for the summer for the ARC at a group home as a direct support staff. Started teaching, and by December decided I hated the classroom, quit my teaching job, and went back to working in a group home. My wife and I have lived in about 5 different group homes, and I've worked for the ARC since then. That was over 40 years ago in Pennsylvania, Alabama, California, and here in Ohio.
Wow. So say a little bit about the ARC's place in the history of the DD system.
Well, we can trace our roots here in Ohio back to the 1930s. One of the first chapters of the ARC was formed in Cleveland in the 1930s. Our chapters in Cincinnati and some of the more metropolitan areas trace to the 40s, Cincinnati and Akron. And back in 1950, if you like history as I do, an organization called the American Association on, right now it's Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, had their annual conference in Columbus, Ohio, and they had a track for parents. All these little parent groups were forming across the country. They had a track for those parents here in Columbus. Parents got together over Memorial Weekend and decided, hey, we need our own organization. So between May 1950 and the fall of 1950, the parents got together and held their first annual convention in Minnesota and formed what was then the Association for Retarded Children. Mm-hmm. Some of our members, the original members, were from the Cincinnati area. Many of you have met Marvin Moss. His mother was one of the founders of the national organization. So Ohio played an instrumental role in that. One of our founders worked on the Manhattan Project during World War II. They were movers and shakers in the 50s. And by 1960, they were actively involved in the Kennedy administration. They fought for, and we still believe were the primary civil rights movement for people with disabilities. But during the 1950s, when kids with disabilities were not allowed to go to public schools, families associated with the ARC began creating their own schools. Those schools, by the late 60s, 1967, had evolved into what are now county boards of developmental disabilities. Mm-hmm. Their kids grew up, they needed something else to do. So the parent movement was very active in that arena. Their next project was to get a right to education. So by the 1970s, parents associated with the ARC filed a lawsuit against first the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, then the United States of America, saying, if it's not right for people of color to be separated in education, it's not right for children with disabilities. So the ARC was then actually fundamentally instrumental in the development of special education and IEPs that we have now. So I like to call us the grandmother of the disability movement. We've also been one of those organizations that just quietly do it. So that's a long history, 7 years.
It is. To kind of piggyback on that, again, this being DD Awareness Month, what specifically here in Ohio, what's our history in Ohio of the family movement and families being involved in getting things changed here in Ohio?
Well, I've met recently with a group of SSAs in one of our larger counties, and I told them to go to every one of the county board schools, every one of the formerly operated county board workshops, and look at the plaques by the front door. The names on those plaques are almost always members of the ARC, parents who helped create the system, helped mentor other families, and kept it going all of these years. We were the organization that said and mandated that at least 3 family members must be on every county board. Quietly moving ahead with those things. DD Awareness Month, in fact, was started by families associated with the ARC. For decades, we had a Saturday and Sunday in March declared by the president as, it was then called MR Sabbath Sunday. We passed out church bulletins with usually quotes from Scripture on the inclusiveness of people with disabilities. So they quietly did those things. Historically, one of our founders was actually Roy Rogers and Dell Evans, and many of your listeners won't even know who that was. But they were a cowboy movie couple back in the 40s and 50s. Dell Evans and Roy gave birth to a little girl with Down syndrome. She wrote a book at the time called Angel Unaware, their belief that children with disabilities were a gift from God. And it changed the culture of going from parents who must have done something wrong to have a child with a disability to, you've been given a gift from God. So we not only dealt with things on a legislative and court structure, it really changed the way people felt about people with disabilities. Dell Evans actually dedicated the book to the ARC, and we still receive benefits. All the financial royalties come to the ARC of the United States for the sale of that book.
Wow. So what is to you, well, what is the importance of awareness, of advocacy? What is the importance of families in this system?
Some of us compare it to the Pride Weeks we sponsor in summer for the LGBT community. I'm privileged and blessed to have known many of our families, and they tell me that in the 1950s and into the 60s, they literally would go from neighborhood to neighborhood knocking on doors saying, I've got a child with a disability. Do you know of anyone in the neighborhood who has a child with a disability? And often they were met. They would know that a child lived there, and the parents would say, no, I don't know of anyone. Part of our movement, it is more of a movement, is saying, I have a child with cerebral palsy, and he's got blue eyes as well. It's okay. And you're okay being the parent of a child with a disability. So, for me, that was one of the major reasons I was attracted to the organization. It was, having grown up with a cousin with a disability, it was normal for me. But the ARC made it seem even more normal. It was like, okay. Even with our name change, we get criticized that we were originally using the R word. We took that out over 30 years ago. But I remember being in the meeting when we took it out. We always met in these convention centers. I'll get teary-eyed, I'm sorry. We always met in these large hotels, and there would always be a placard or the billboard would say, Welcome Association of Retarded Citizens. The change in the vote came because a dad stood up in the back of the room and said, every time we meet here, all of you are upset and offended by the word of. It implies that you have a disability. My son knows he has a disability. My son knows he has a disability. How do you think it makes him feel? And the group voted to take the word out.
Wow. Amazing story. It really is.
But that's who we are. Our meetings are more like New England town meetings with a spiritual approach. We're not church related. I get accused of being too paternalistic. If someone calls for help here, it's more of a don't mess with the family.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about some of the kind of foundational things that have come because of families pushing for it. You specifically talked about the county board system here in Ohio, the special needs education, IDEA, and on a federal level. Those type of things all came about because of family movements. What do you see as the next thing? What's the next step? What's the next hurdle that families should be tackling right now?
Because I stand on the shoulders of those founders, I get to sit at the table. I see us as the rational, grassroots, common sense message that. So we sit at the table in discussions dealing with Medicaid or anything at the Department of Developmental Disabilities and the Department of Education. We bring that common sense. We bring the voice of, we want to do certain things in the budget, but this is how it's going to affect parents on Main Street. We don't endorse, and in most cases don't oppose, any one method of service delivery. We just want the civil rights to be protected of people with disabilities, and we want people that need help to get help. So we're there to just be that voice. I often say, if you think you're one of ours, you probably are. We represent people with all types of developmental disabilities. And oftentimes, when we get a phone call, it's from someone that I'll pick up the phone and they'll say, I heard you could help. And then we steer them in the right direction. That could be even someone who was just diagnosed with cancer. An example I use, it's not unusual for an obstetrician, a pediatrician, to refer a mother to us who just gave birth to a child with a disability. Not too long ago, I got one of those calls. 6 months she had waited. She called and said, my doctor told me to call you. My little boy has Down syndrome. He was born 6 months ago. I said, congratulations, and she started to cry. That I was the first person to say that to her. That's who we are.
Yeah. So here in Ohio, coming up shortly, the budget process will begin.
Right.
And families play a key role in what testimonies are given around that budget. The ARC has listed some of their priorities or some initiatives they'd like to see in that budget. Can you say a little bit about the DSP workforce that I know you're so involved with, as well as the youth with complex needs? Where do you see families fitting in to those budget initiatives that the ARC's laid out?
Well, the first one with direct support professionals. We've helped families from across this state get a waiver. They have waivers and now they can't find staff. There's over a 60% turnover rate in traditional residential services. And if you have a child that's lucky enough to have a waiver living at home with you, it's difficult, if not impossible, to find the staff to support them for a lot of different reasons. We believe primarily because the wage is so low. Our staff are getting, on average, less than $11 an hour with no benefits. Many of our staff are getting a minimum wage with no benefits. We have to get that up to at least a living wage. Our proposal is that in the next biennium, by 2020, we raise the minimum average to $13 an hour, and by 2021, raise that to $15 an hour. That would be on average. That's hardly even a livable wage in Ohio. One of the many challenges we face is we're getting feedback from direct support staff that, yeah, I want that, I need that, but I'm also so poor I'm on Medicaid. And if I get $1 an hour raise, I may lose my Medicaid, which is my only health insurance. So we've got a serious dilemma going on. We have over 700 people in Ohio that are at risk of losing their waivers because they're not using them. They're not using them because they can't find staff to provide the services they need to keep their children healthy and safe. So that's always been an issue. I've been doing this for 40 years. It's always been an issue, but it's a crisis at this point. With complex care needs, and this is the grassroots effort, essentially before this year, if you had an adult son with cerebral palsy that weighed 150 pounds, and they needed to be lifted to get into the bathtub, the staff person that lifted them into the bathtub got the same salary as the person that took the guy to the movies to get him out into the community. So it was more difficult and challenging to find a staff person if they had to do manual labor. And if they were an independent provider, they're not even getting covered by workers' compensation for that back injury they're sure to sustain. So we and a group of moms met with the former director of the Department of DD, and over a few months, he agreed that, yeah, we need to raise the salary specifically of people with complex care needs. So there's an additional amount of money that you can currently get added to your waiver for those individuals. And that's helped. But it was literally 3 moms going with me, and we met with the director several times. We met with legislators, we prepped them. Much of what I do, much of what we do with the legislature, I don't speak often in front of the legislature. What I will do, and I occasionally do testimony, but what I will do is help people tell their story. I grew up in the church, and it's the same type of testimony. So we teach people how to present their testimony, and if needed, I stand at the podium and hold their hand under the podium. We've reactivated, I like to say we're reciting our grassroots. We've been redeveloping parent support groups across the state. Many of our families don't know governance. I shouldn't say it's just our families. People in general don't know the governance structure of the United States anymore. So many of our trainings on a local level have been, this is your county board. They report to the county commissioners and the probate judge. This is how you testify. Get to know your legislators or your local civic leaders, because they will become the state legislators who will become members of Congress, and this is how you do it. In April, we'll be going along with a contingency of other Ohioans to Washington to speak to members of Congress about the need to increase direct support salaries.
So for the families watching this, can you give folks 1 or 2 things that they can do today to either help with DD Awareness Month, to increase their own advocacy? What can families watching do to help move things forward?
Get to know your local folks. That could be your county commissioners. Superintendents of county boards plead with us to have parents attend the county board meetings. They meet monthly at the county board office. You can find out where their meetings are by going to your county board website. It's a specific day every month. They may take off the month of December or a month in the summer, but they meet every month, and those boards of volunteers appointed by county commissioners and the probate judge make decisions about the lives of people with DD in the state of Ohio. They do an annual plan, they put it out for public comment, and no one shows up. So we're encouraging families to go to those meetings, get active. That's the first way to get into the legislative process. The next way is to find out who your state representatives are. You can go to the ARC website, type in your zip code. It will identify who your elected officers will be, elected leaders will be, and you call them, and in your hometown, invite them out for coffee. Sit down with them with coffee. You don't need to know the budget. You don't need to know legislation. You just need to tell them about your child. We get bridges fixed because people say, I need that bridge fixed to get to work. We, as family members, don't tend to tell anyone. When we meet someone in the mall, the first thing we don't say is, hey, I got a kid with a disability. We take pride in that we take care of our own, but we need help. And we've got to be able to tell people we need help. Whether we like it or not, we're part of the welfare system. And what I get told in the State House and in Congress is that we're the worthy poor. We're the people that taxpayers and legislators want to fund, but we don't speak up. We don't tell them we need help. So it's part of pride in who my child is, pride in my family, and just being able to talk about it, even brag about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who's watching. Hopefully you came away with some ideas on how to get involved in our DD system during DD Awareness Month and ongoing. For more information, you can visit our website at dodd.ohio.gov, and be sure to check out our new DODD Family Forum on Facebook. You can do that by typing DODD Family Forum into the search bar at the top of the Facebook page. You can also check out everything Gary was talking about the Arc of Ohio by visiting www.thearcofohio.org. There you'll find all kinds of resources, events that the ARC has going on, documents, links to all different places that families can find help. It's a really great resource if you have the opportunity to visit that. So again, thank you all for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Family Talk.